Good afternoon. The Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee will come to order. Today is Wednesday, March 5, 2025, and we have a quorum present. Members, we've got about 8 bills we want to get through today, and in 2 hours, that puts us about 15 minutes per bill if we average that out, so we're going to try to stick with that so we can be done on time. I'm going to start with Senate File 852, Senator Oumou Verbeten. By the way, most of the bills that we have today will be laid over for possible inclusion in the policy or budget bill down the road. In fact, I don't think anything else is going to move on because they all start and end with the Judiciary Committee on today anyway. So, Senator Oumou Verbeten, tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have an amendment, an author's amendment for Senate File 852, just to kind of put this in the shape we want to put it in. We're working on a special revenue fund, some additional sources to bring in there, and some reporting requirements. So that's the new language for the bill.
Let's do the author's amendment. Senator Oumou Verbeten moves adoption of the A5 amendment. It's a delete everything. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails. Amendment's adopted. Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just a critical conversation for this budget year. Crime Victim Services really is in a crisis, and we heard about that earlier this session as we had our victim survivor advocates in this committee, also for their Day on the Hill. We've held a press conference on this crisis that we're facing, and this bill is hopefully going to be part of the solution. What we're facing is dwindling and uncertain federal support, and it's really decimating our response to crime victims and survivors. These services are shelters, hotlines, legal assistance, counseling. They're all really essential lifelines for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And, our advocates are also supporting law enforcement and prosecutors. Without proper funding, Minnesota's victim services will be forced to make devastating cuts that can look like staff layoffs, reduced programs, and closures that are honestly already looming on the horizon. And I just want to remind folks that this work really does impact real people. It is our neighbors, friends, families. Many of us are personally impacted by domestic and sexual violence, whether as survivors ourselves or loved ones of those who have survived. So the bottom line is that we need more funding, and we've outlined a new framework for sort of a Minnesota VOCA. We're trying to bring in revenue from multiple sources. We've looked at things like marriage license fees, and we had a great conversation on the AI notification bill and looking to get any of those penalties into this program. So we are trying to be creative and find sources of revenue anywhere we can. I'm really grateful for this collaboration with the advocates who are truly leading this work every day, and we'll hear from them in a moment. Also thankful for the governor's budget, which places a placeholder in the budget at $5 million, but this bill is really a step towards addressing the necessary emergency funding and the long-term investments and commitment to those in our community who really need the help the most. Survivors really are in desperate need of support, and when they reach out, they shouldn't be turned away. So I hope we can find the resources to fund these critical services.
Thank you, Senator. Members, there is a packet of documents in your handouts today for this bill. Senator Oumou Verbeten, are you ready to move forward with your testifiers?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so we'll just go in the order. I've got them bulleted on my agenda here. Molly Montague and Sarah Gangelhoff, if you'll come on forward. I think Sarah Gangelhoff is on Zoom. We'll verify if she is present. Is Molly Montague not here? No one's coming forward.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Oumou Verbeten.
it sounds like those aren't our testifiers. I wonder if that's for one of my other bill. Hello?
Well, I've got Senate File 852 in front of us. Why don't you tell us who your testifiers are for this and have them come forward? Let's do it that way. And just keep in mind, members, obviously you all are welcome to testify that we can fit in, but we did have a lengthy hearing already on crime victim services and coalitions, so if you could try to keep your testimony focused without repeating things that we've already heard, we'll be in a better position to hear all of our bills here today and still give you a fair opportunity to give us your information. Whoever wants to start, go ahead and identify yourself for the record and give us your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Latz. My name is Sarah Kern, and I'm the Executive Director at Hope Coalition. We provide advocacy services for individuals impacted by domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, and those lacking basic needs. We serve rural communities in Goodhue and Wabasha counties and are the only domestic violence shelter within an hour's drive of that area. This bill will speak directly to providing services to those who are underserved. Rural areas are underserved due to being geographically isolated and the fact that we face unique challenges due to a lack of infrastructure, lack of resources, and we are often forced to be creative and innovative to meet the needs of our communities. Our communities lack bus systems and transportation for survivors to reach supportive offices, and our rental vacancy rates hover around 0%. This makes it even that much harder for victims to flee. A specific example of missing infrastructure was the lack of forensic medical services available in our area. Survivors would have to drive over an hour to receive care. Last year, we took action by opening a forensic exam room in our Red Wing Outreach Office that provides critical services closer to home. Another way that we have been innovative is adding mobile outreach services throughout Wabasha County. Monthly, we partner with food shelves in 5 of the most isolated places in order to ensure that our community members can access services. In addition to providing direct services, we also host collaborative teams made up of law enforcement, prosecutors, medical professionals, schools, and mental health providers. Together, we work to provide the best support possible for our community. Without organizations like ours, the system would be completely overwhelmed by people needing help. In rural communities, some counties are staffed with only 1 advocate per county. Wabasha County is one of those. A reduction in funding does not simply mean layoffs or reductions in staff. It means shutting down our services altogether, leaving entire communities without vital support. I want to share a quick story to illustrate how critical our work is. Last year, a local police officer contacted us about a sexual assault survivor who needed a forensic exam. The police station did not have enough staff to help provide transportation. Our advocates stepped in. We mobilized our sexual assault nursing team, we provided transportation, and we ensured that the survivor received medical care in our office. We also provided new clothes, food, and a safe place to stay for that night. This is the kind of support that is only possible because we are here. A reduction in funding would mean that doors are closing and communities would become even less safe and add even more strain to our already overworked social service system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kern. Our next testifier is Bobby Holtberg. Could you state your name, please, for the record and begin your testimony?
Sure. Bobby Holtberg. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Oumou Verbeten. My name is Bobby Holtberg. I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota Alliance on Crime. I'm here today on behalf of all 6 of our statewide crime victim coalitions, 2 sexual assault coalitions, Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, 2 domestic violence coalitions, Violence Free Minnesota, Mending the Sacred Hoop, 1 child abuse coalition, the Minnesota Children's Alliance, and 1 general crime coalition, my organization, Minnesota Alliance on Crime. You heard from our collective coalitions a couple of weeks ago. You have handouts in your packet that describe our mission, some FAQs, and outline some budgetary information, which will be the focus of my testimony today. We come here today at a crossroads. Federal crime victim services funding has been trending towards an all-time low. And in fact, the last several weeks, we have seen all Violence Against Women Act funding opportunities vanish from the federal grant portal, payment for work that has already been completed, delayed, and and we seriously question whether the VOCA funding that reached a one-time high of $58 million per year in 2018 and has now dwindled to $7 million projected for this year will even make its way to Minnesota. We know that when putting together your budget this year, you will be challenged. with the state's forecast and the uncertainty of things happening at the federal level. We also know that budgets are a moral document of what one values. Crime Victim Services simply and desperately needs your help. The financial sheet in your packets demonstrates the dire situation we are in, but I'll lay it out for you. If the legislature this year aims to simply maintain the level of funding that is currently available, in addition to the annual base of $26.5 million, we would need $22 million per year in one-time funding. That doesn't account for the $7 million per year that would be outstanding with the uncertainty of the federal funds. This speaks to the needs to do something different. If we want to change the trajectory of crime victim services in Minnesota, we need to see and find a better way. A way that allows our work to be more about prevention, a way that brings more child advocacy centers online to handle the more complex and severe cases that allow for local access, forensic interviews, and medical interventions. A way to effectively and compassionately fulfill statutory requirements. A way to provide full wraparound services to our clients instead of the emergency and reactive approach currently undertaken due to limited funding. A way to regain the number of domestic violence shelter beds instead of closings due to funding shortages. A way to provide culturally specific services so that our efforts are effective, meaningful, and change the trajectory of one's life for the better. This better way is contemplated in the Delete All Amendment discussed and adopted. We need a long-term, politically viable, financially viable solution that builds upon the one-time funding allocated over the current biennium and the one-time funding we need again this year to get us on the other side of implementing this long-term solution. We know that there are still details to be worked out. The coalitions have left no stone unturned to consider what aspects of a state VOCA structure would work. You discussed some of them today, and we will continue to search. We value our partnership with OJP and want this structure to be one that works for them, as well as direct service programs. We value our Senate author, our House champions, and all of you who are listening today and will help us fashion the right path forward for a better structure and future for crime victim services in Minnesota. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holtberg. Our next testifier is Sarah Gangelhoff, and I believe she's appearing by Zoom. Ms. Gangelhoff, when you're ready, please identify yourself for the record and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name, Chair Latz and members of the committee. My name is Sarah Gangelhoff, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Innovation at the Women's Foundation of Minnesota, and we're in strong support of Senate File 852. For over 50 years, the Women's Foundation has invested more than $54 million in organizations across the state and advanced policy to create a state where women, girls, and their families can thrive. Our research with the Center on Women, Gender, and Public Policy at the Humphrey School is clear. Women and girls in Minnesota are harmed by gender-based violence throughout their lifetime, in their homes, on the streets, and in public institutions like schools and workplaces. Women of color, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and those with disabilities and Native American women face even higher rates of violence. The consequences of this violence and other crimes without comprehensive support to survivors includes poor mental health outcomes, chronic disease and health problems, unwanted pregnancy, substance abuse, homelessness, and a lack of personal safety. Crime victim services play a vital role in helping survivors and their families rebuild their lives by ensuring they're heard, protected, and supported, and women and girls represent a high percentage of Minnesotans benefiting from them. Additionally, this bill supports the advocates doing the tireless, emotionally difficult work directly serving survivors in highly stressful environments. Victim services also enhance public safety and encourage victims to report crimes without fear. which aids law enforcement and strengthens community trust in the justice system. Without these services, we are neglecting the people of our state, often leaving them vulnerable to further victimization. We appreciate the work of Senator Oumou Verbeten and the co-authors for bringing this bill forward and for their continued work to create and pursue policies that will make Minnesota safer for women and girls. We urge you to support Senate File 852. Thank you for your time and for allowing us to testify remotely today.
Thank you, Ms. Gangelhoff. And finally, we have Molly Montague, who I believe is also appearing by Zoom. Please state your name for the record and begin your testimony.
Hello, thank you. I'm Molly Montague with the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, better known as RAIN. And I thank the chair and members of the committee and the senator and co-authors for bringing this bill. RAIN is perhaps best known for running the National Sexual Assault Hotline. And we regularly hear from survivors who, in the aftermath of a rape, have no idea what to do next, how to find safety or process what happened to them. And in these instances, we often refer them to local support that is essential to their journey. When someone is sexually assaulted, it is the victim services and advocates in Minnesota that are stepping up to take care of them. In Minnesota, over 1 million women and nearly 500,000 men have experienced sexual violence. Currently, these survivors have access to more than 90 service providers across the state, each offering services such as crisis lines, advocacy, safety planning, counseling, and support groups. However, as the other groups today have testified, severe shortfalls have threatened these services. The decrease in funding will have a significant impact on sexual assault service providers' ability to meet their current and developing needs of survivors across Minnesota, leaving survivors without access to medical, emotional, or legal advocates. SF 842 mitigates the financial impact of the Victims of Crime Act's decrease in funding by providing temporary funds for the services that surround survivors at all points in their interactions with the justice system. This funding provided by this bill offers a vital lifeline. Nationwide, organizations are laying off staff, cutting services, or shutting down entirely because they lack the funding to go on. As advocates for survivors, we need these services to be there. Without this funding, we risk losing crucial partners in the fight against sexual violence. States are stepping up to ensure that vulnerable populations they serve aren't stranded and exposed to continued violence. I want to make clear that I'm here today to voice support for this bill because of the impact it'll have on survivors. RAIN does not receive funds from states, and we aren't advocating to receive any of these funds. I'm here to stand beside Minnesota's victim service providers and urge you to pass this bill so that they can continue to do the hugely impactful work that they do. We urge you to support S852 and show survivors that you've got their back too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Montague. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? Senator Westlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Oumou Verbeten, and to all of our testifiers. As you know, this is a very important issue for me as well. And I do want to thank Senator Oumou Verbeten. We have intersecting interests here in that I'll be presenting a bill later on the Minnesota Family Resiliency Project. And Senator Mann is bringing forward a bill, Senate File 1409, that would actually get rid of the reduced fee for people who undergo premarital education. And so there would just be a single fee. And so one of the things I really appreciate, Senator Oumou Verbeten, is you coming to me, and hopefully we can work collaboratively with Senator Mann to try and sort out what we will do here. Of note, one of the reasons why Senator Mann is bringing forth her bill is that there's a significant amount of abuse for that reduced civil marriage licensing fee. There is an organization called the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. They are ordaining people, and then people go and get premarital education or something along those lines and qualify for the reduced fee. And the one thing that I know that you're interested in working on here is we don't want to pit programs against each other, especially programs that primarily serve women, because that happens all too often, that women's organizations that serve victims of crime and so forth often get the short shrift when it comes to funding. And so, again, Senator, I really appreciate that you always take a very collaborative approach to legislating. I appreciate that very much, and I look forward to working with you on coming up with a way for us to fund both of our programs.
Thank you, Senator Westlin. Senator Oumou Verbeten, any response?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Westlin. Absolutely. I want to make sure that we get the adequate funding for the family resiliency programming as well. And we're, like I said, we're trying to find anything we can. We'll figure it out. We're going to be laying the bill over. We've been in touch with the administration. We're looking for, just multiple sources of revenue. And there's some that we have explored and then realized that doesn't work because it's already serving an important group of people. So I'm on the same page as you and look forward to figuring out a solution here. Thank you so much.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I ask any questions, I want everyone to know that I believe that organizations that respond to sexual assault are vitally needed in the state of Minnesota. However, I do have some questions about this proposal. A little bit of creative financing is what I could term this, taking money away from the fund that on marriage license fees, raising the dollar amount, taking that raised dollar amount and then sending it to a completely different purpose. One is raised for a civil purpose, and now that money is going to be used in response to a criminal act, which is kind of unusual, but nevertheless. I was just wondering, what does the civil marriage license fee go to? If we're taking money away from that fund, what are we taking money away from? What is that purpose? Do you know?
Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Limmer. This is what Senator Westlin and I were just speaking about. So she's got legislation for the Minnesota Family Resiliency Partnership and also has a proposal to increase those fees. So this wouldn't be taking away from that. It would be an increase on top. But we're coordinating because there's multiple proposals this year to increase those fees and want to make sure that we're not pitting programs against each other.
Madam Chair,
Senator Limmer, before you go on, I'm wondering if Mr. Turner has anything to add.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. This bill increases the civil marriage license fee and sends the increase to the new account in the Special Revenue Fund. The other bill does not increase the fee. It just changes the allocation, and it moves $30 that would normally go to the general fund into the Minnesota Family Partnership Act, or it increases that allocation. So that's the difference between the two bills. If you increase, for the man bill, if you increase it up to, it would be $125 now if it goes up to the regular standard marriage fee. You would have a lot of money that you'd have to decide, because the difference would be 125 versus 50. You'd have $75. You decide where to allocate that.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Senator Limmer?
thank you. So the way I read the bill, if it would pass, an additional $10 would be assessed a civil marriage license fee, as well as an extra $10 for those undergoing premarital education. So for every one of those uses, $20 would go into the victim crime account. I just find it rather creative that we're going in a kind of a loop-de-loop type of way of finding funds, but nevertheless, that's what it reads. The other part of your bill creates mandatory penalty assessments. We've had a lot of discussion about mandatory penalties in this committee, especially around gun use. And I believe quite a few members on this committee have voted against mandatory assessments, ordering the court to strictly follow our dictates. I've argued for mandatory penalties before, but I find it rather curious that now we're telling the third branch of government what to do on penalty assessments. And I find that in that bill, on lines 4.15, when a court is sentencing a corporation that's been convicted of a crime, is there a specific crime that you're focusing on, or is that any crime that you're focusing on?
Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Limmer. So this idea is sort of modeled off of what California has done to kind of create their own VOCA program. So it's really just looking at when corporations have been convicted of a crime in Minnesota and then issuing those penalties to go towards crime victim services. So I don't know that I have a specific one in mind, but that is the approach we're trying to model to find additional sources of revenue.
Okay, and,
Senator Limmer, anything further?
I'm sorry, what?
Anything further?
Yes,
Senator Limmer.
thank you. So in the event that a corporation is found to have broken the law and convicted, the court is it's under a mandatory direction from the legislature that they would have to impose another assessment on top of a previous assessment. And then that money also would go to the account. And that the court, on lines 4.21 to 22, the court may not waive payment of the assessment. I would imagine that this might border on a separation of powers argument, telling the legislature, telling the court how to impose sentences, and saying that they cannot waive the payment. So I just wanted to raise that question because we have had this discussion numerous times over the years, and the court looks rather poorly at that type of thing, that when we do that from the legislature. How would you enforce this action on the judicial branch, Senator Oumou Verbeten?
Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Limmer. Again, I would just remind us of the kind of state we're in, where we're facing a crisis, and we're really just looking for additional sources of revenue. So these are continued conversations that I think we're having with the administration that we'll be happy to have with the courts. It's a model that another state has pursued, and I understand it and sensitive to our role in the legislature and the court's role and any separation of power issues. But we are just, with the immense cuts we are facing from the federal government, we just have to look for any other avenue to find funding for these critical services.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Any closing comments? Senator Oumou Verbeten?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's kind of been said by all of the advocates, and I do want to thank our testifiers who came online. It's great to see we have so much support, and just wasn't aware that we had additional people signed up to testify, but I'm extremely grateful to both Sarah Gingelhoff at the Women's Foundation and Molly Montague at RAIN, and this is just really important work, and we are trying to do everything we can to make sure there's funding for these crucial services. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senate File 852 will be laid over. Stand by.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Turner.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members. I would, if there's still time, I'd like to suggest a technical amendment to the A5.
Well, we might as well take care of it. The bill's being laid over.
Right, but just for the record.
We'll bring Senate File 852 back.
There's a missed reference in the bill. The bill increases the fee to $50 for couples that receive premarital education on line 2.24. But in the allocation subdivision, That was not changed. So on line 4.1, I'd suggest we delete $40 and insert $50. That would be the amendment. And it would then reflect the increase that was made earlier in the bill.
Senator Oumou Verbeten?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to make that motion.
Any questions or discussion about the proposed amendment here? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails. Amendment's adopted. We have now laid Senate File 852 on the table. Senate File 914, Senator Oumou Verbeten. The testifiers can come on forward if there are any in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senate File 914 is bill for funding civil legal services. We also received a great presentation on this earlier, but just as a reminder, civil legal services or legal aid provides critical legal representation to low-income Minnesotans in civil matters. I will say a recent cost-benefit analysis shows that civil legal services deliver $4 back to Minnesotans for every dollar invested, and that means more Minnesotans with secure housing, recouped payments, equitable outcomes in family court, and much more. This is on top of the benefits our court systems feel when parties are actually represented in court. But right now, 1 out of every 2 of our constituents who is eligible for these services and walks into their local legal aid office is turned away just due to the lack of capacity. So this is denying Minnesotans access to justice, deprives them of financial security, and bogs down our courts. And this bill continues the investments that we made in the last biennium and then would allow more of our neighbors and Minnesotans to access the justice they deserve. I'll stop there, and then we'll let our testifiers share more about the great work they're doing.
All right, which of your testifiers wants to go first? All right, Ms. Germander.
Chair Latz, members of the committee, thank you for having me here today. My name is Bridget Gernander. I am currently the program administrator for the Legal Services Advisory Committee and will be transitioning to the State Board of Civil Legal Aid. And hopefully on Zoom, which I cannot see, is Dory Rappaport, the Executive Director of Justice North, who will be starting our presentation.
She is present. Ms. Rappaport, go ahead.
Chair Latz, members of the committee, thank you so much for having us today. Again, I'm Dory Rappaport, Executive Director at Justice North. And thank you, Senator Oumou Verbeten, for what you contributed about why we're here today and what we're seeking before the Senate committee. I'd like to, can I just check real quick to make sure that the PowerPoint is being shared for the committee currently? I can't see it myself.
Members, in your packet's been distributed as the PowerPoint. Go ahead, Ms. Rappaport.
Thank you, Chair Latz. Last time I was here, I spoke with you about a survivor of domestic violence and how the work of legal aid significantly impacted the outcome in her very trying situation. And today I'd like to tell you about an elderly individual named George. So George was faced with an overwhelming challenge when he received a pre-termination notice from his assisted living facility due to a surprising outstanding balance of $50,000. So his sister, who served as his power of attorney, did not understand how this happened, where this huge balance came from, and she was so nervous about George's potential loss of housing and care. So she called legal aid. A legal aid attorney stepped in and immediately began assessing the situation and came to find out how they got into this $50,000 mess. There had been a disruption to George's Social Security benefits. So then this legal aid attorney assisted George and his sister through the process of applying for medical assistance long-term care. And then the attorney successfully negotiated with this assisted living facility to bring that outstanding balance down to zero. With this huge financial burden resolved, the pre-termination notice was canceled and the threat of eviction was lifted. So thanks to legal aid, this elderly individual was able to remain in his home with the care that he needed. And I wanted to share this story too to point out that this assistance happened outside of the courtroom. But as you can see, it was still very important and significant, the service he was provided. Now, if you look at the next page, you'll see an illustration of the three legs of the stool. And this is our Minnesota justice system. Each leg of this stool, the courts, the public defender, and civil legal services, are critical to ensure that equal access to justice is accessible for all individuals, regardless of their circumstances. Without one, the system becomes unbalanced. And if you look at the next page, you can see that we are a statewide system. Civil Legal Services is comprised of multiple nonprofit organizations, but we are a coordinated statewide system to deliver these critical civil legal services. So we have single points of entry for people to apply for help. And that means they can call our 1-877-MY-MN-LAW phone number to do an intake, or they can apply online at lawhelpmn.org. Or if they need access to technology, they can go to one of our many publicly available legal kiosks at various locations around the entire state. At this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Bridget Jernander to give an update about Civil Legal Services funding management.
Thank you, Ms. Rappaport. Ms. Jermander.
Thank you, Chair Latz, members of the committee. My role has been as a court employee staffing the Legal Services Advisory Committee, which has been the structure for funding, making grants to the civil legal aid organizations that Dory was speaking about. In the last legislative session, the statute was passed to transition that responsibility from the Legal Services Advisory Committee to the State Board of Civil Legal Aid. And staff who were funded to support LSAC automatically transfer by statute to the new board. So I am just here to talk a little bit about that transition. We are working to have that ready to go on July 1st and make sure that there is no disruption in the funding to civil legal aid, and that we have the procedures in place for accountability for the statutory funds, which will be the primary purpose, along with the provision of high-quality legal services as directed in the statute. And so the next slide, one of the things that my office does is collect statewide data about the provision of civil legal aid. That includes case data, impact of the civil legal services, as well as the funding sources for civil legal aid. We included a slide that shows a breakdown of when you total all of the budgets of the grant recipient programs, what the distribution is between different funding sources, including the state appropriation, as well as other government funding sources, including the federal funding, which is much talked about these days as far as the possibility of changes to federal funding. And I'll turn it back over to Dory Rappaport to discuss the funding request.
Ms. Rappaport.
Chair Latz, members of the committee. So if you look at the next page of your handout, you'll see the Civil Legal Services budget request for fiscal year 26-27. I know we mentioned this before, but as a reminder, we were asked what it would take to fully fund civil legal services because we are turning away over half of all eligible individuals who seek us for assistance. And so last biennium, we came and presented a 6-year plan to you, and we were thankful for what we were able to receive. It moved the dial significantly when it came to salary parity. And so we intended to come back and to continue with our 6-year plan, but when we heard about the fiscal forecast, we sat back down at the table and said, you know, we really need to figure out a way to stretch this out. And so we came up with a 10-year plan, which, as you can see, is significantly reduced from what we were asking for before. So under the 10-year plan, we are asking in fiscal year 26 for an additional 8.83 million on top of our current base, which is 34.167 million. And then in fiscal year 2027, we're asking for an additional 20.508 million over the base, for a total of 29.338 million. And if you go to the next slide, you can see what we would do with these funds. So we would continue to work on salary improvement. We were able to move the dial, as I said, on starting salaries for staff across the board, but there's still work to do. We still need to also account for cost of living increases. And this allows us to maintain that excellent retention that we've now moved to in the last 2 years. We were at a 34% turnover rate just 4 years ago, and now we have decreased it to 14%. We'd like to keep it at that rate, and so it's important for us to continue to maintain the salary progress we've maintained. And then we want to now bring on additional staff, and so this would allow us to increase the number of closed cases Civil Legal Services provides for over the next 2 years. So we're looking at increasing our closed cases by 20% if we receive the funding that we're asking for, which would mean an additional 25,000 Minnesotans in their households would be served. And so the next slide is just questions and answers. So I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you for the testimony, Ms. Rappaport and Ms. Germander. Any questions from members of the committee for either of the testifiers? Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the budget proposal here, and I see the value of legal services as very important, but legal aid got a 84% increase last biennium. The proposal here is 43% this biennium, and then 124% in the tails, which in this budget forecast is quite astounding. And so I guess my question is, does any of the reason for these kind of high budget proposals have to do with the transition of the office to a centralized state model?
Ms. Germander.
Chair Latz, Senator Kroon, we are looking at adding 2 FTE, so it would be a total of 4 FTE staffing the State Board of Civil Legal Aid, but that would be an administrative cost of approximately 2% for the appropriation as a whole. The vast 98% of the increase would go to direct civil legal services.
Any other questions? Not seeing any. Thank you, testifiers and Senator Oumou Verbeten. And Senate File 914 is laid over at this time. We are now going to take up, we're not formally going to take up Senate File 644 because there was a late amendment that was proposed that would need to be shared with stakeholders before we can hear that bill. However, Senator Anderson did arrange to have a family that's impacted here, drive here to the Capitol today to testify, and so we want to give them an opportunity to share their story with us. So we're going to do that. I'm sorry, I was referring to Senate File 631. That is not going to be taken up today. So Senator Anderson, welcome to the Judiciary Committee today. If you would like to go ahead and introduce the basic framework of your proposal, and then we can put that in context with your testifiers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members, for your indulgences. Understand that there was a late amendment that came forward and that this bill would be basically taken up at a later date. But I do have the testifiers that affects the gist of what happened where a member of a family was went missing off of a college campus, and it's been years since the case that was opened up trying to find this missing person has continued to be considered active in the part of local law enforcement. And so because of the concerns for the family and their needs for more information, they are asking for some further clarification in the law. And so I'm going to let them discuss what happened in their family, and at the best time that we can take up the new amendment that was brought forward at a later time, we'll take that up at that time. So, Mr. Chair, I have Mr. Gamone and Mr. Josh Newville with me today to give you, the committee, a background to what their concern are.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. Who wants to go first?
I guess I'll go first.
All right, sir, if you go ahead and just state your
Senators.
name for the record and give us your story.
Brian Gimo. Senators, I am Brian Gimo, the father of Joshua Cheney Gimo, who has been missing since November 10th, 2002, from the campus of St. John's University, Collegeville, Minnesota, where he was a junior. In the last 22 years, we were not treated very nice, always told the case is active, therefore we will not tell you anything. This bill would make changes that a lot of families of missing persons could benefit by letting someone else go over everything. This language change is long overdue, considering more missing persons cases would have a better chance of being solved. After all, that is what matters. We, the families, want answers to what happened to our loved ones. This bill would help make that more likely. Thanks.
Thank you. That's got to be devastating. So sorry for your situation, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Senators, committee staff. Thank you for your time. I will reserve the balance of my testimony today. And by the way, my name is Joshua Newville. My apologies for the lack of introduction. But I'll reserve the balance of, or the substance of my testimony for when this does get fully taken up. I apologize for the late amendment. Just some quick context. This is the language of the amendment that you may or may not have in front of you right now is identical.
We didn't. We took the bill itself off the agenda.
Got
We
it.
don't have any materials, but we'd like to hear what you have to say.
Sure. So the language of this is identical to Senate File 5136 from last year's legislative session that was co-sponsored both by Senator Anderson and Senator Carlson. And I apologize for the oversight and how the version of 631 ended up here. It was just a clerical error.
No problem, sir.
But in terms of the context of this, the problem with this particular Minnesota statute 13.82 subdivision 7, it addresses criminal investigative data, and there's just a hole for missing persons cases. It doesn't quite fit the mold that this particular statute is designed to address in terms of the definition of criminal investigative data. Not all missing persons cases involve a crime, and so the carve-outs for when data can become, when an investigation can become inactive just doesn't fit this particular situation. And so, or many situations for missing persons cases. And so I will come back at the relevant, or at the appropriate time and provide further testimony in support of this, but that's the sort of the big picture for today. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. We will bring the bill back, but there are a number of stakeholders that I think would want to have time to think about the proposed amendment before we hear it formally before the committee. So hopefully that will happen before we return. Any members of the committee have any questions for either of these testifiers at this time? All right. Thank you for coming here today, and have a safe drive home. Next up, Senator Anderson, Senate File 644. Members, there is being distributed a letter for you to review, and the plan is to lay the bill over. Senator Anderson, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and describe your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, it actually is a misprint in your agenda. It should be Senate File 664 rather than 644. So Senate File 664 is...
So then, Senator Anderson, for the record, it is the agenda misprint. Senate File 664 is before us, and that is what has been distributed to the committee members. There is a letter from the Alzheimer's Association accompanying the bill proposed. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members, for your indulgences. And we bring the bill 664 before you because many of the members, my mother and father, both experienced dementia. And even when my brother and my other siblings, sisters, took the keys away from my father, he would get in the car and they would find him at the local grocery store, and not knowing that he had driven there. But when you're 96 years of age, you have a tendency to know where you're going and how to get there, and you don't really know that you're not supposed to be driving without a revoked license, with a revoked license. So we're concerned about those people that have dementia, those people who have Alzheimer's, and those who have other experiences of traumatic brain injury. And so we have members here with us that want to testify on behalf of this bill. We think this is important to help secure and make people aware of these individuals who might be on our roads or might be in our communities, and they need to be considered as an endangerment to themselves, to their community, but also be considered that they have experiencing symptoms and problems that many of our loved ones have experienced today. So I'll stop with that and let some of my people testify and let them talk. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd like to go ahead and identify yourself for the record and give us your testimony, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Kyle Burnt. I'm here today on behalf of the Long-Term Care Imperative, here to support Senate File 664. Alert systems intend to quickly locate and ensure the safety of individuals at risk. Such alerts also encourage public and communities to play an active role in safeguarding missing persons. When people are informed about a missing person in their area, they can provide timely assistance, reducing the risk of harm and alleviating pressure on emergency responders. Minnesota is a rapidly aging state, with 1 in 4 Minnesotans reaching 65 or older by 2030. The alert system changes provided in Senate File 664 provide another tool to ensure safety for Minnesota's aging population. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague to finish our testimony.
Thank you for your testimony. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Erin Hubert, and I am also here on behalf of the Long-Term Care Imperative. We do support the goals and tools in Senate File 664. We would like to offer very gentle caution about the precedent of enumerating specific diagnoses and whether simply having that diagnosis makes a person endangered without any other context. That said, we wholeheartedly support the efforts that move to more quickly activate alerts and attempt to locate and return missing individuals to safety. This bill uses existing alert systems without adding additional requirements to hinder the quick and effective and safe locating of missing or endangered persons like those outlined in Senate File 664, and we appreciate Senator Anderson for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hubert. Any questions from members of the committee for either of the testifiers or Senator Anderson? All right, not seeing any. Senate File 664 is laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
Senator Seeberger, Senate File 679. Members, there's a one-pager background information being distributed to you along with a copy of the bill. Emailed to you was a substantial trove of additional documents which are available then online as well if you wish to look at that. Senator Seeberger, you have a couple of witnesses came up with you. Why don't you introduce your bill, and then we'll take the testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is my honor to present before the committee Senate File 679, which provides for a very modest bit of funding to Hometown Heroes Outdoors, which is an organization that provides mental health and wellness and resources for first responders, EMS, law enforcement, fire. And it does that by arranging outdoor activities in a manner so that first responders can get the help and the mental support that they need without necessarily having to specifically ask for it. It's sometimes hard for those of us in the first responder profession to raise our hand and say when we're not okay. And I'll let Chris Tetchell talk a little bit about the organization, but sort of the unique thing is once you get somebody outside, get them out fishing, get them out hunting, camping, whatever it is, with a few other people from the same background, same profession, it's a lot easier to form those bonds and get the mental health support that you need. I have Chris Tetchell from Hometown Heroes Outdoors, who can talk a little bit about the organization, and Brian Peters from the MPPOA.
Mr. Tetchell, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, thank you for having me. Committee members, my name is Chris Tatro. For the record, I am the president and one of the co-founders of Hometown Hero Outdoors. A little bit about myself, I served in the military, the Minnesota Red Bulls, for 9 years. I deployed to Bosnia in 2003 into Iraq in 2005 with the 1st BCT, and I've been in law enforcement for the past 16 years. We started the organization in 2017. We're based in Stillwater, Minnesota, and we facilitate outdoor recreation for military service members, veterans, and first responders with to help with mental health and to reduce suicide numbers and bring down the rates. Today we're here to advocate for SF 679 to support outdoor recreation for law enforcement, firefighters, and EMS. Something to keep in mind is many military service members do serve in a capacity in a first responder role after their service to the military. HHO has provided over 2,700 Minnesotans with outdoor experiences and over 5,700 across the 26 states that we operate in. Approximately 15% have been first responders, and as I earlier stated, many of them do have prior military service as well. These trips are just not recreation, they're therapy for PTSD, depression, stress reduction, and suicide prevention. Why this matters, if I ever have a chance to talk about statistics, I'll take it. So, law enforcement officers are more likely to die by suicide than on the line of duty. 45% of firefighters have contemplated suicide. 1 in 3 first responders will develop PTSD. EMS personnel have a 39% higher suicide rate than the national average. Stigma prevents many first responders from seeking mental health support. They need alternative, peer-supported, confidential paths for healing. Outdoor therapy is a solution, and we've seen it work. First responders need alternate, community-driven solutions. Research has shown that recreational activities in the outdoors can significantly improve mental health. Despite the majority of this group experiencing adversity, only 23% were reported as seeking any kind of help. Approximately 17% of law enforcement officers have sought any type of care for PTSD, and 7% sought any form of mental health treatment. A Sierra Club study found that a group of individuals engaging in outdoor activities that serve in these types of professions have profound psychological improvement impacts. Nature-based therapy reduces PTSD symptoms and improves stress management. At HHO, we provide hunting, fishing, hiking, outdoor wellness days, snowmobiling, ATVing, dog sleds, hot air balloon rides, you name it, if it's outdoors, we do it. We do have proven impacts. We do take pre- and post-trip event surveys where we do gather some metrics and information from individuals, and I'll report some of those today. 74% of participants report excellent mental health after an HHO trip, which is a 38% increase. 77% experience significant stress reduction, and 94% say that they will continue outdoor activities on their own, which is significant. We're getting them off the couch, into the outdoors, getting their new healthy habits, and being able to converse with others. Isolation is a killer when it comes to having mental health issues, and that's what we're trying to do, teach them new healthy habits somewhere in the outdoors. One individual even said that I hadn't left my house in months, and after my HHO trip, I finally felt like I had a purpose again. We just don't run trips, we train our team in suicide prevention. So as we establish this relationship with individuals in the outdoors, they reach out to us when they're in time of need or a crisis. So we started to use a system called ASSIST, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. It gives our volunteers, or 100% non-paid volunteers, more tools in their belt because we're not medical professionals. And this helps us with crisis intervention. We have had people who are suicidal in these professions reach out to us, and we have kept them here with us. Why funding is needed. HHO operates with over 90% of funds going directly to the programs that we do in the outdoors. Approximately $100 per person per day, so we stretch the dollar as far as we can with the resources we have available to us. The demand far exceeds our resources, and we're looking for additional support. So in the proposal that we have, 50% of the funds would go directly to outdoor activities, where we'd be investing in Minnesotans, in the Minnesota economy, with different resorts, outfitters, guides, whatever we can find in the outdoors. 30% is going to go more towards mental health assistance and leveraging people who do have the mental health professional background. So additional assist training, additional peer support programs, but also leveraging places like another nonprofit called the Bige on the Backside. They have a nonprofit with equine therapy with retired racehorses out of Canterbury Park. Another individual, Brittany Misquick, is a owner of Wellness That Fits. She is a doctor in suicidology. She specializes in working with first responders and military service members, and also looking at other individuals who may be across the state where we can give people alternative means of care. One of the stigmas that is dealt with within these professions is employee assistance programs are great. They work really well. However, there is a barrier with that. What first responders do encounter is if they're truly being organic with something that is linked to their place of employment, it could potentially be career-ending. And if they're not being organic in what they are engaging in to heal from, are they really healing? So we're able to have a detached way for them to seek care outside of their employment and outside of their insurance needs. 10% is going to go towards additional outreach and growth, finding those more first responders that are out in the state of Minnesota. And then another 10% is going to go towards administrative fees, such as our accounting team. We have a 5-person accounting team that goes over our books and ensures that everything's in order through ABDO. They're a leading firm in the state for nonprofits. Additionally, we have some additional support that we could use through our insurance as well as attorney's fees and whatnot. Not that we get into any legal trouble, just we talk to them quite a bit to ensure that we're doing everything correctly. So SF 679 is an investment in first responders and their well-being, suicide prevention and crisis intervention, and first responder care longevity. In closing, I ask the committee to please consider this bill for inclusion, and I appreciate your time and thank you for having us today.
Thank you, Mr. Tetral. Mr. Peters.
Good afternoon, Chair Latz, members of the committee. My name is Brian Peters. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. I currently represent around 11,000 members, rank and file, police officers, deputy correctional officers, and 911 dispatchers across the state of Minnesota. We testified in the House, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, on the one-year anniversary of the Burnsville incident where we lost 3 of our first responders. One of the jobs that I don't like to do, but we do, is we meet with families after a tragedy like this. And we do that work pro bono, where we apply for all the state and federal benefits on behalf of the family so they can spend time grieving their lost one. I do want to make mention that this service is also available to those families. And if you can imagine, after losing that loved one, having an avenue where you're still connected to other people doing this job is extremely important. When our members are going through PTSD, and as this committee knows, you've been heavily involved in allocations made in the past for people going through the process of PTSD, what I will say is that is still a work in progress. We are still working on how do we get the results that we want, the positive results of getting people back to work. And I look at Hometown Heroes Outdoors as a piece of that puzzle. A lot of times what happens when someone is suffering from PTSD, if they're not from a very large department, they're sent home to start their treatment process. They are, in a sense, removed from a lot of the people that are considered family. When you spend a 12-hour shift with someone 3 days a week, they become family. And there is not a lot of avenues besides, getting the clinical therapy that people, families, military can turn to for that support, which I believe is very crucial in getting people back to work and getting people back to a sense of purpose. This organization does that. That's why I'm here today. I've seen the results of what this organization has been able to accomplish with providing the outdoor activities. As many of you know, first responders are avid hunters, avid outdoors people, and connecting with like-minded people going through the same struggles is important to be around to, again, become healthy, get back to work, hopefully. The allocation that was made by the state, the $100 million, I believe, 2 sessions ago, we've already spent $34 million was the last figure that I got. And a lot of those costs are for the ability of the city to get reimbursed for healthcare costs and things like that. This, again, I see as an additional piece of the puzzle that isn't that part of that bill that someone is experiencing. And We haven't, again, seen the results that we would hope to happen. It's still new in the process, but again, Hometown Heroes Outdoors kind of supplements that therapy that somebody may go through, and also is there for the families that may have lost a loved one due to suicide, may have lost a loved one due to what happened, for example, down in Burnsville. So we need the support, and I know that in a time where budgets are very thin, as Senator Seeberger said, this is a very, what's the word you used? Modest. But I can't stress enough the importance. And I wouldn't be here today if advocating on behalf of Hometown Heroes if I haven't been a part of it and seen the work that they do and the results that they get. And at the end of the day, that's what's important, is to get people back to work, to get people healthy and on the road to recovery. So I would recommend support of Senate File 679. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Any questions from members of the committee? Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and, you know, I can thank you, Senator Seeberger, for the bill. I guess, you know, I can attest to the value of this organization, Hometown Heroes Outdoors. I've partaken in some of their activities, and I've also partaken in some of their fundraising activities. The question I do have, though, is I noticed in the bill, veterans aren't included. Is there a reason for that?
Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Howe, we have a separate bill that was heard in Veterans Subcommittee for funding for the organization relative to veterans.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Howe.
Thank you. So that's great. So how does the accounting work to keep those funds separate from the veterans to the firefighters and public safety folks? Because I would think those, maybe, do you keep those activities totally separate, or do they have activities combine these folks, or how does that work?
Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Churchill, do you have any wisdom?
Mr. Tetral.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, we do have different accounting for each of those specific professions. As far as the veterans bill goes, we have a specific banking account for that, our separate set of books just for that, same as the first responder side. But our accounting firm would be the ones that would be responsible with helping us with that, and we're developing a system, because right now it's all mixed, right, without the allocation. But as we begin to engage and hopefully have some success with the appropriations, when we engage with individuals who are going on, they'll still have mixed trips together. But when it comes to the allocation, we'll have to be very specific in identifying what professions that we're engaging with and ensuring that we're allocating things appropriately to that profession.
Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the other question I have then is, I don't see in here how much DPS is going to keep for grant administration. Is that we're going to see that at some time, or because they go anywhere from 2.5% to 10%. So I'm just concerned that if you're looking for a certain amount of money, that doesn't get stuck in grant administration. And I would hope that we try to keep DPS's fingers out of it as much as we can. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Seeberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would hope that too, Senator Howe.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Howe.
I guess I'd like to see it. You know, I think it'd be appropriate if we sometime in the future put that into the bill as far as exactly what DPS is going to take. Thank you.
Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Seeberger. And it's really great to hear about the work that y'all are doing for first responders. I had a meeting last week with Teamsters Local 320 and probation officers, just talking at length about, you know, the trauma that they experience in their work as well. So I was just curious if they're included in that definition of law enforcement officers, if you all have any experiences of working with folks in that profession as well, and if they would be, again, eligible under this bill.
Mr. Tetral.
Mr. Chair, Senator, thank you. So right now, our bylaws are specific to law enforcement officers who can effect a legal arrest. When we started the organization in 2017, it was military veterans and law enforcement, and we expanded into fire and EMS in 2022. So we were incrementally changing who we serve in these professions as we grew, so we knew that we made sure that we had what we needed to support those individuals. Our intent is to continue to evaluate that as we move forward, so people in those professions can at one point be adapted into our bylaws for service.
Senator Oumou Verbeten. All right. Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Seeberger, or to your testifiers, how long has HAO been around?
Mr. Tetral.
Senator, we've been in existence since October 2017.
2017?
Correct.
Senator Anderson.
Thank you.
Senator Seeberger, are you also carrying the bill that went to the Veterans Committee requesting an appropriation to the same organization?
Yeah, yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
And how much is the request for that?
It was the same.
So you're asking for a total of $1 million in appropriation?
That's
from
correct.
the legislature this year for HHO?
That's correct.
And the trips would be co-mingled, if you will, as well, or mixed, I think is the way Mr. Tetral put it, mixed groups?
Right, well, while the groups going out might be mixed, the accounting will be separate in terms of where the money comes from and who's funding what.
And what is the purpose then of having separate accounting?
Mr. Chair, so originally when we wrote these bills, it was a separate in the event that we couldn't get something to advance for a certain profession or further. So there was the road that we took again this year, but with the separate accounting in the adventures and the things that we do in the outdoors would still be commingled. However, the accounting based on the appropriation would be separated just so we have a financial oversight that we feel comfortable with.
Thank you. Any further questions? Not seeing any. Senate File 679 will be laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Pappas, Senate File 1580.
Mr. Chairman and members,
Senator Pappas.
thank you. I'm here this morning to present Senate File 1580, funding for the Violence Prevention Project Research Center.
Before you go any further, Senator Pappas, I just want to note to the members, there was an email sent out March 4th to you with documents on this, for this matter. Some have been handed out to you as well, but we want to make sure you had access to everything so you can check your emails. Thank you. Senator
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you're working with researchers, there's lots of research. So I was first introduced to the Violence Prevention Project research folks when Professors Peterson and Densley were providing an active shooter training for the St. Paul Public Schools. Subsequently, I was pleased to author legislation to fund their center, read much of their impressive research, and attended their research summit last fall, was it? Last fall, yeah, with a couple of our colleagues also joined me. Their work is invaluable in informing us all on research-based best strategies for preventing violence. They will talk in more detail during their testimony. I wanted to be brief to be sure I gave them plenty of time.
Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Go ahead. Go ahead and identify yourself for the record, Ms. Peterson.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Jillian Peterson, and I am the Executive Director of the Violence Prevention Project Research Center. I am a psychologist by training, and I've also worked previously as an investigator. I worked on death penalty cases in Chicago and New York. Nonpartisan gun violence research is really critical at this very moment. I think safety is a universal for all of us, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. No one wants their kids killed at school. Everyone wants to be safe. Everyone wants their family members safe. Sometimes we disagree on exactly how to get to safety, and that's where I think research and data can really help tell the story and bring us together. Our approach is about embracing the complexity of violence and gun violence, understanding the pathway that gets someone to the point of committing violence. We include both statistical data, and we also do a lot of talking to people. We talk to perpetrators, we talk to victims, we talk to law enforcement, and really try to bring all this information together to come up with really action-oriented, tangible, public-facing solutions. Our work has garnered support from gun owners and non-gun owners, people across the political spectrum who I think are drawn to the fact that we embrace this complexity and really tell the truth about where gun violence is coming from and what the solutions look like. And we're at the point where a lot of support for this type of research is drying up across the country. I think it's also very important that we're independent. We're not a state agency. And so we're able to operate kind of outside of that bureaucracy. We were incredibly grateful to receive funding 2 years ago. And since then, we've done a number of projects, which we probably overwhelmed your inboxes with. But just to briefly touch on a few of them, we looked at the implementation of extreme risk protection orders over the last year to understand how they were being used. Were they being used appropriately? Where are the gaps in training? And how can we help law enforcement better use this critical tool? We did a survey of Minnesotans to look at gun violence exposure, the mental health impacts of that exposure, gun ownership, safe storage, and what might influence individuals to safely store firearms. At the request of the Commissioner of Public Safety and the Superintendent of the BCA, we did a study looking at the exponential increase in officers who have been shot and injured and killed in the line of duty in the last 5 years. There's been just a huge rise. And we did a deep dive into all of their records to try to come up with what are the patterns, what are we seeing, why is this happening, and how can we help prevent this in the future. We also did a look at the spike in homicide that occurred in 2020 and 2021 to try to get at what are the root causes behind that spike. Because if we don't understand that, we cannot design policy and know who to fund to prevent that until we really understand those root causes. And then, like Senator Pappas mentioned, we held our first gun violence research summer this fall, which brought together hundreds of practitioners from across the state. Lawyers, law enforcement, policymakers, teachers, doctors, lawyers, kind of getting everybody around the table to talk about how to use data and research to push us forward to a safer Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Dr. Densley.
Chair Latz, member of the committee, it's an honor again to be here. My name is James Densley. I'm the co-founder of the Violence Prevention Project Research Center. I'm also a sociologist by training, and I'm a professor of criminology and criminal justice. And in a previous life, I was a middle school special education teacher.
Which job was harder?
That one, definitely. Definitely. I would just like to add, in addition to the materials we've already sent and shared and everything that my colleague Gillian just mentioned, you know, we're a research center that doesn't just study problems, we're really trying to solve them. This renewed state funding for gun violence research is really essential at this time to compensate for the reductions in federal funding, and also because philanthropic contributions, while incredibly valuable, are just not sufficient or sustainable to fill that gap nationwide. The funding here is really to continue our work, which we really try and do with the best interests of the public and the policymakers here in Minnesota in mind. This will pay for the administrative support for the research center, the support for our leadership, continuing the research projects and coordinating all new ones. The actual costs of research itself, data collection, analysis, data scientists, statisticians, student research assistants, which we leverage a lot and provide a lot of great opportunities for them, and all the materials associated with this. And then, as was also mentioned, the cost of dissemination. We really believe in being public-facing, being transparent, and really trying to do the work that can move the needle on these issues. So this means our website, which is a really valuable resource for researchers, journalists, practitioners, policymakers. Our webinars, which we hosted monthly in one of our semesters. Our reports, our annual research summit, we would like to continue that work, other public-facing events, and then publications, conference fees, and so on. This center is more than just research, it's about impact. And with this appropriation, we aim to not just study violence prevention, but to truly transform it, building a safer Minnesota. So thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Professor. Senator Pappas.
I really recommend that people take a look at some of the articles and that they've written, the op-eds that they've written about some of the work that they've done. It's really, really interesting. They can really develop patterns. They can help inform communities and police and schools about when intervention would be very important, because a lot of times it's young people, school shootings in particular I'm talking about, who feel isolated, who are angry, who have rage, and who have access to guns. And that's where safe storage is important, that they don't have access to guns, and that's where mental health professionals can be very significant in being able to intervene before it gets to the point. And the other thing that I really noticed in the articles, and I'm kind of giving away your stories, is that many of these young people, they told others, they put it on social media, they wrote about it, they talked about it, that they were contemplating these school shootings, and that they knew they were going to lose their lives. They were not going to survive it. So it was a form of suicide, going out in a blaze of glory by killing their teachers and their classmates and then dying in the process. So it's very, very sad.
Senator Pappas, we also have a note that you have a Rodolfo Perez who is going to testify. Is that?
He wasn't able to
No,
make it.
he wasn't able to make it.
it.
And do we have, we had some written testimony?
There's 2 written
There's 2
testimonies.
written testimonies.
Yeah.
I don't see
Okay,
them in the
we'll
packet.
refer you then, members, to the written testimony that's been distributed or referenced in the packet.
see it.
I'm partway through the Violence Project book that you two have written. I appreciate it. It's very informative, very helpful, and I'm sure Minnesotans will be alive because of the informed research and the ability to implement that research in real time in real places. And it's also a national resource. It's not our job to fund national resources. It's our job to fund Minnesota resources, and I see it very distinctly as a Minnesota resource as well. So thanks for the work that you do.
Thank you.
All right, any questions or further comments from members of the committee? Senator Loomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Pappas, is this appropriation only for 2 years, or are you intending it to be ongoing?
Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Limmer, of course, we would have loved to be in the base, but given the situation, right now, the funding situation, you know, we're happy to accept anything that can help keep the center going.
And, Mr. Chair,
Senator Limmer.
I understood from testimony that there's an annual report that you publish. If you're doing that type of work, why would you need to have the appropriation from us? What's the difference that you're trying to provide us as a state if the money did go into a violence prevention project research center?
Dr. Peterson.
Sure. The annual report was actually to the legislature to respond to what we did with the funding that we received 2 years ago. So it goes through all of the different projects that we did, the recommendations that came out of it, and then the changes that were implemented from that. And it is included as one of the attachments.
Right, it's online.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We didn't print it out because it's so
It's
extensive.
long, yeah.
Because they've done so much.
Right, that's right.
Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Pappas. I just also wanted to voice support. I've heard great things about the Violence Project from both of my school districts, St. Paul Public Schools and Roseville area schools.
Thank you.
Thank you. Doctor, do you get any federal funding for your work?
We had in the past. There was meant to be a project we were going to be collaborating on. It's uncertain whether that's now funded or not. But that was also, the federal funds were always tied to very specific projects. So our original study of mass shooters in the United States was a National Institute of Justice grant, but that was only a 2-year grant. It was 2018 and 2019. It expired in 2020. And then we are working with some colleagues in another research center, which is tied to looking at domestic extremism. But it's very uncertain whether that money is actually coming to that center now and whether our role will continue with that work.
Yeah, I would just add that our federal funder is the National Institute of Justice, and they've currently frozen any research funding for the foreseeable future. So we don't anticipate federal funds.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it says to fund a violence prevention project research center. There is not a center right now.
Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's just the way that we have to write the legislation. I think this is the only violence prevention project research center in the state. So the implication is it's this one.
So, Mr. Chair.
Senator Anderson.
Senator Pappas, how long has this project research center been in existence?
Since
Dr. Peterson.
2020, is that right?
2020.
Yes, 2020.
And Mr. Chair.
Senator Anderson.
Senator Pappas or your testifiers, where does it exist right now?
Dr. Peterson.
So we're an independent research center, but we're housed at Hamline University to use their kind of grant administration and, health insurance and such. But that's where it's housed currently.
So, Mr. Chair.
Senator Anderson.
Senator Pappas or your testifiers, does part of the money go to renting part of Hamline University for your location?
We pay a small indirect fee, 10 to 15%, that includes rent and then additionally all the services they provide us, payroll, grant administration, all of those types of things.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Anderson.
Senator Pappas, is there a location that's being projected to be outside of Hamline University in some other location somewhere else?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Anderson, no, this is not for any new violence prevention center. This is for the existing one that is located at Hamline University.
It's a lot of money. Thank you.
It's a lot of work.
Maybe we can get a little more detail on exactly what the money is used for then. Dr. Peterson? Dr. Tinsley?
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Right now.
Yeah, give us a
Yes.
brief description of that.
Sure. Yeah. So the funding really is paying mostly the direct costs of what it costs to do research. So some of that is then the time and administration for the center itself. Jillian's role as the full-time executive director of the center. I'm in a part-time capacity currently with the center. It would be ideal to make that a full-time role, but it's not that at the moment. And then the actual projects themselves, we have where we've contracted out with data scientists and statisticians in order to do the additional analyses that we do. We also have the data collection process, the dissemination process, the hosting of the research conference, for instance. We bring on board several students who we then pay in a sort of intern capacity that are getting valuable exposure to the research process and are building databases and everything else. We have our website the funding goes to. Yeah, and just research is expensive. These projects can be very expensive in so much that they are very time and labor intensive, and you need a very specialized skill set to do certain things, particularly when you're looking at high-level statistical analysis and data analysis, and the need of a sort of a data scientist to manipulate data. As a case in point, we surveyed nationally 10,000 Americans about their exposure to and experience with gun violence. And then we oversampled for Minnesotans, 1,000 Minnesotans. So in total, it was a sample of 11,000 people, and it was nationally representative. That was a 12-minute survey. So you imagine the questions you could ask in 12 minutes, and then all those different data points that then need to be analyzed. So contracting with the research firm in order to get the survey administered, getting those 11,000 responses on 50-odd different data points, analyzing that data, writing up that data, disseminating that data, and so on. It's an example of a very large-scale research project that becomes very time and labor-intensive.
Can I give one other brief example? So when the Commissioner of Public Safety asked us to look at why we are having this huge increase in the number of officers being shot in the line of duty, we had to go through a long process of data sharing agreements, but they ended up giving us all of the records for 120 cases over the last 5 years where an officer had either been shot or killed. Each of those 120 cases took about 40 to 80 hours to go through every 911 call, every body cam footage, every interview that was done. We coded each of those on 150 different variables to try to look for patterns in the data to come up with solutions to law enforcement to say, here's what we're seeing, here's the patterns, here's what we could do about training, here's what we could do about prevention, and that's the level of intensity it takes to come up with those recommendations.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Pappas.
the op-eds are in the packet, but if people are really interested in diving into this, I would just recommend you take a look at the report that they provided to the legislature about all the work that they did do for us last year. And I think if the committee would like kind of a detailed budget, I'm sure that, Dr. Peterson or Dr. Densley can provide that.
Thank you. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to say, I'd like to see those reports if you've got them.
It's attached. Nicole, how do they find the report? It's in the attachment to your email.
Oh, in the email. Okay.
You should look in your Senate email on March 4th.
March 4th.
I don't know how many pages it was, but we decided not to burn more trees to print it.
All right. Senator Carlson.
Yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'd like to draw special attention to how trustworthy your information has been, such that you would get an endorsement from the Gun Owners Caucus. Getting that endorsement, I think, means a lot to me that, you're not doing anything partisan and leaning any way, which way or another, in getting the Gun Owners Caucus to endorse your work and to support it. So I congratulate you for that.
Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion or questions, Senate File 1580 is laid over for possible inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senate File 1835, Senator Pappas.
Thank you.
Oh, there you are. Hi. Hi. Thank you. Great. Mr. Chairman, Senate File 1835 provides some ongoing funding of $150,000 per year to the Children's Law Center. The Children's Law Center provides pro bono legal representation to children in child protection cases when they've been removed from home due to allegations of abuse and neglect. Susan Diori from CLC will elaborate on. But CLC basically is a longtime trusted partner of the state with a long history of integrity, a good value to the state through their training of and use of pro bono private sector attorneys. They're excellent at providing not just legal representation to Minnesota's at-risk children, but also providing mentorship and stability to these kids. Although their work is concentrated in the metro area, they do take on cases statewide on an as-requested basis, and they are expanding their network of volunteer attorneys and training in these specialized skills to both private sector and public sector CHIPS attorneys. Please welcome Ms. Diori.
Ms. Diori, are we pronouncing your name right?
Diori, you are correct.
We're
Got it right the
trying
second
to
time.
determine here exactly how to be respectful and pronounce your name properly. Welcome to the
Thank you.
committee.
There's a lot of vowels in there.
Go ahead with
Thank
your
you.
testimony.
Chair Latz, members of the committee, my name is Susan Diori. I'm the Executive Director at the Children's Law Center of Minnesota. I want to thank Senator Pappas and Senator Cruin for your support on this bill. As Senator Pappas mentioned, this request for $150,000 per year as an extension of one-time funds that we received in the 24-25 biennium. Our mission at CLC is to promote and protect the legal rights and well-being of children and youth, primarily through legal advocacy, but also through educational outreach and policy reform. Again, we primarily implement our mission by providing that direct legal representation to abused and neglected children and youth. ages 10 to 21 who have been removed from their home and placed in the foster care system. As you might imagine, the children who we represent have been removed due to the most difficult circumstances. Some of them have been sexually trafficked, some of them have been sexually abused or physically abused. They might be neglected because of addiction issues from their caregivers. So these are our most vulnerable children in Minnesota that we represent. We also provide educational activities for our clients and also our volunteers and other professionals who serve children in the foster care system, including we provide continuing legal education, legal research and publications, and we also provide technical support and consultation services to other professionals and institutions who are in the children in foster care. So ultimately, our goal at CLC is to help the most vulnerable children and youth successfully transition into adulthood by giving them that voice in the courtroom. We have over 200 dedicated volunteer provided pro bono services, including one of our own senators here. We also have staff attorneys. They all stay with the youth, and they work directly with that youth during the entire time they're in that foster care system. And they work with them directly so that they can express their wishes in the courtroom and help them engage in those proceedings that are involved in their cases. Obviously, we believe, and I think the statistics support that when we do give them that representation and that voice in the courtroom, they're going to lead to better successful outcomes for those children and youth. So just a little bit of history about CLC. We're actually celebrating our 30th anniversary this year, so we've been in existence since 1995. As she mentioned, we've been a longtime trusted partner of the state with a long history of integrity. We have a lot of support from the bench and bar, support from the bar foundations. We have our staff attorneys serve on many of the Judiciary Children Justice Initiatives, the Supreme Court Council for Child Protection that was just passed last year. So we're very much involved in that. We've been very transparent and accountable with all of our state funds received. Just a little bit of background of what we've done in those 30 years. We've had over 1,000 volunteer attorneys trained to represent these children. We've represented over 4,100 abused and neglected children who are in the foster care system. Just in 2024 alone, our volunteer attorneys reported hundreds of pro bono hours valued over $780,000 just in 2024 alone. Last year, we provided direct representation to 420 children and youth, as Senator Pappas mentioned, primarily in Ramsey County, but we also will take on cases in other counties as well, usually upon request. Some of our key benchmarks for representing these children, we would like to see over 70% of our children graduate from high school. And last year in 2024, 77% of our children and youth graduated or were on track to graduate in last year. So we also successfully won a presidential Minnesota Court of Appeals case last year, prohibiting counties from detaining non-delinquent foster care youth in locked detention facilities, which was a big milestone. When we don't have those other resources, we just don't want to use those locked detention facilities for those non-delinquent youth. We also aim to represent 95% of our active clients to a permanency plan, so they are reaching adoption, transfer custody to another relative, et cetera, and we routinely meet that mark. We're also working this year to expand our volunteer network. So a lot of our children need other services as well, other legal services like trust in the states or criminal. So we're working to enhance our network of volunteer pro bono attorneys on some of those other areas that often interact with their circumstances when they are in foster care systems. So I know you have a lot of requests in front of you. There's always more requests than there are funds. But this small funding, $150,000, means a lot to our organization. We are a very small nonprofit. Obviously, we are service-oriented, so the vast majority of our expenses go to staff salaries and benefits, and they work very hard and meaningful work, so take a lot less pay than your normal attorney would. We provide a great deal of value, I believe, for the state. Again, our network of those volunteer attorneys in and of itself is $780,000 worth of pro bono work. And the unique work that they provide helps the state relieve some of that burden to provide the legal representation to these youth that are required under Minnesota Statutes 260C. So Also, our volunteers and our staff attorneys, we provide a very stable adult for those children who are in need. One of the things that they are lacking, and something we can provide for them, is that stability of one adult throughout the entire time they are in foster care. We also have a youth resource manager. She has been in the social work realm for over 20 years. She helps work with our volunteer attorneys and our staff attorneys to make sure that those children who are in foster care also get the resources that they need, in addition to that representation. So whether they need mental health care, whether they need dental care, all the way down to that prom dress or those water shoes for summer camp. Those are the things that we work with both our staff attorneys and our children to make sure that they can, again, be successful in the end. Again, we appreciate your consideration today. We appreciate your consideration for our support. We think we provide a great deal of value for you, for the state, and we appreciate your support of this continued funding. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Diori. Any questions from members of the committee? Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is my understanding that you have had 400 child clients that my understanding is that they had legal representation. Did they get placed then into a family? Is that the
Yes.
essence of the?
Right, so there's a process.
Ms. Diori.
Mr. Chair.
Just so we have the
I appreciate
record
that.
that's being recorded for posterity, just need to make sure we identify who's speaking, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Anderson, yes, we do track what these children are obviously in through a long period of time. Some can be in for as little as 4 months, some can be in for many, many years. So we do track our closed cases. And yes, when they reach permanency, they are either adopted or they are transferred to another relative. So those are tracked, and I can certainly get you numbers if you'd like.
Mr.
Senator
Chair.
Anderson.
To the testifier, I have 3 grandchildren that have came from the foster care and are adopted, and so they're no longer foster kids. They're my grandchildren.
Wonderful
So,
news.
I appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Senator Kroon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I've been a Children's Law Center volunteer since 2016, and it's a great organization. It's very well respected in the bar, and it does have a very high-quality pro bono network. And these services are required, as you said, under Section 260C, but they're not always met. And so the outreach part that you're talking about is very important to make sure that these kids that are eligible for this legal representation get it. But the quality of the lawyers working for these kids are really high, and their experiences run the gamut across the legal landscape. And so I know if I need help in an area of law that I don't understand, they probably have a different volunteer that can help me provide those services. And the staff attorneys are very knowledgeable and helpful as well. So, and it's really important for the kids. Yes, there's the social worker in the county and the guardian ad litem sometimes, and they're all have their roles to play. But from the kids I've talked to, not just my clients, but adults who have gone through this, to have that advocate in court that says what they want to say to the judge is really important. So thanks for this bill.
Not seeing any other questions. Thank you, Ms. Diori. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
Members of
Mr.
the
Chairman,
committee.
members.
Senate File 1835 is laid on the table. Senator Westlin, Senate File 734. Senator Westlin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. We are going to be as efficient as we possibly can, but this is a very important bill today. Mr. Chair and members, this is Senate File 734, which is the Supplemental Nonprofit Security Grant Appropriation. And just by way of a little background information, this program was first initiated in 2017, and I believe Senator Limmer was actually the first author that provided funding for this program. It was created after a series of high-profile bomb threats that were leveled against the Jewish community centers, both nationally and in Minnesota. And while many states have created funding streams to assist vulnerable nonprofits in increasing their security, Minnesota's program is unique in that it is designed to be easy for both filling out an application and for the Department of Public Safety to administer. Applicants only need to apply through the Federal Nonprofit Security Grant Program. If they are unsuccessful in securing federal money, then they are automatically considered or able to become eligible for state funds. This means less time and expense for the applicant, and the state does not need to administer multiple separate programs. As is often the case, the need for these security grants continues to be greater than the available federal or state funding. Less than 2% of all federal money goes to Minnesota applicants. And just because a nonprofit does not receive that federal funding, it does not mean they did not submit a strong application. Organizations must identify a compelling need and a heightened risk of being a victim of domestic or foreign terrorism. Of the states with nonprofit security grant programs, Minnesota's $250,000 per year is among the lowest allocation. But due to the success of the program in 2019, 2021, and 2023, this program has been renewed by the legislature. However, all of this has been one-time funding. This is, again, a one-time funding bill to expand the program grants through 2026 and 2027. Eligible organizations can receive grants up to $75,000, and those organizations can include houses of worship, schools, summer camps, social services, and really any nonprofit that finds themselves exposed to a significant security risk. These can be used for enhancements such as ballistic window film, video monitoring, and so forth. With so many stories of heightened hate and division recently, this program is as important now as it was in 2017. I'm sure all of you know that fairly recently, Temple Israel had swastikas painted on their building yet again. And we do find also that in Minnesota, our Islamic friends and neighbors often find themselves also to be on the receiving end of hate and threats. And without these grants, there are many small profits that would be unable to afford the security measures that they desperately need to keep themselves and those they serve safe. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I do have two testifiers. Senator Limmer was not in the room, and I just mentioned, Senator Limmer, that you were the first person to author the bill for this program. Senator Limmer is a co-author on the bill, along with Senator Latz, and I appreciate that, again, this is something that has received significant bipartisan support.
Thank you, Senator Westlin. Which of your two testifiers would like to go first? You can go ahead. Mr. Allen.
Mr. Chair, Ranking Member, Senators, my name is Rob Allen, and I'm the Director of Community Security for the Jewish Community Relations Council, Minnesota, and the Dakotas. In that role, I help synagogues, schools, day camps, and nonprofit organizations throughout the 3 states be as safe as possible for people who want to practice their faith, learn, be together, and serve their community. Unfortunately, a big part of my job is addressing the steady stream of hateful anti-Semitic vitriol experienced by the members of the community I serve. In the last year, for example, the windows of an organization that serves students were shot out, causing not only fear, but thousands of dollars in damage to the organization. A historic synagogue experienced thousands of dollars of damage as swastikas were spray painted on it, as Senator mentioned. And a cemetery experienced damage that resulted in needed repairs in the thousands of dollars. On a weekly basis, I get reports from organizations that I serve getting hateful and threatening voicemail and email messages. There's a little bit of good news, however, in all of this. In these terror incidents, the windows that were shot out did not completely shatter because we had invested in ballistic film that held the windows intact. When the synagogue was vandalized, we were able to identify the suspect because of investments in video cameras. The fact that we were able to investigate these threats, work with law enforcement, and provide more than 100 hours per week of armed security patrolling our organizations in the metro area is because our community generously supports community security. It's important also to note that we work very closely with colleagues in other faith communities. The sad reality is the people who would target Jewish facilities are equally likely to target mosques, churches, and other organizations with which they have some dispute. Faith groups have this challenge in common. We try to be open and welcoming, which makes security especially challenging. And we also often put the burden of vigilance on volunteers who would frankly rather be practicing their faith rather than posted up maintaining security. The Nonprofit Security Grant Program was developed to help small nonprofits with target hardening that they couldn't otherwise afford. My organization doesn't seek nonprofit security grant funds because we don't want to compete against smaller organizations that have security needs for which security funding will have a much greater impact. These funds help provide facilities resources that allow their members to focus on worship, fellowship, service, and learning without the distraction of being the sole physical security presence. I think it's also worth noting that in the United States Senate, just this morning, there was a hearing on anti-Semitism. Minnesota Senator Klobuchar spoke at that hearing to the importance of the Nonprofit Security Grant Program in combating anti-Semitism. I urge the committee to consider supplementing the very small amount of funding that Minnesota nonprofit organizations get from the federal government so that we can continue to keep nonprofit organizations safe. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Putis? Did I pronounce that properly, or did
It's
I?
Purdis.
Pardon me?
Purdis.
Purdis.
Purdis,
We're missing an R in our
P-U-R-D-I-S.
agenda. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Go right at Mr. Purdis.
I'd rather my last name than my first name. Thank you, everybody, for being here. For the record, I'm Tamar Purdis. I am the Chief of Security at Shiloh Temple International Ministries under the Honorable Bishop Richard D. Howell Jr. in North Minneapolis. I apologize, I don't have anything written up. I guess I can just freelance because Mr. Allen, he laid it all out for us. So, yeah, it's not only with the Jewish community, like Mr. Allen said, it's places or houses of worship in general. I don't know why it's like that, but over the years, I noticed collecting data that it has been targeted to houses of worship. And like Mr. Allen said, our duty is to have an open house so people can come in and worship and feel safety. But we notice people come in trying to receive that, and when they come back out, their car is gone, vandalized, some type of hate verbiage spray painted on their cars. And it's just an attack on the spiritual worshipers who's trying to focus their mind on receiving the word of God, when all the time they focus on worrying about if somebody might come in, an active shooter or anybody come in and start shooting up people. So it's my job as the Chief of Security to focus on that aspect, training, civil liabilities, and things of that nature. But most of all, even though I'm in a house of worship, my job is always ongoing, so I never even had the opportunity to enjoy the word of God, because I got to focus on reports, I got to focus on calls of service, supervise, I got to do a whole lot of things. So it is a lot of terror, in my opinion, is going on in all houses of worship. It doesn't matter what denomination it is or what kind it is, it's happening around the city, the county, the state, and we really need help, and we would like to you guys to approve this bill so we can help each other in all houses of worship possibly blend together and combat this terrorism. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Curtis.
Senator Westlin.
Clearly heartfelt and spoken eloquently, even without having written it down first.
Thank you, Mr.
Or
Chairman.
perhaps especially so. Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, it's kind of really sad that in this day and age, we have to do things like this. You know, I just wanted to share with Bonnie and I go to the same synagogue, and at any time we're having a large event, we're no longer doing it at regular services, but we have a kind of a, we call it a Shomrim team. My husband's on it. It's a team from our congregation that you know, greets people at the door, checks the bags, looks for any obvious person who looks like they don't belong. People who know everyone in the synagogue are there. And we also hire a police officer who parks down the street but is still there should there be a problem. I mean, we do that for high holidays or any kind of major event. And it shouldn't be the case. You know, I don't know if other churches are doing that or other mosques, but I know the synagogues are doing that.
Well, and we know at least 2 mosques have been firebombed in the last several years. And some other incidents of violence, property damage against mosques. I think as recently as in the last 6 months, if I recall, there was one incident as well. So it's a lot of hate out there. Anyone else? Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sarah Westlin, I want to thank you for picking up the baton on this issue. You're right, and thank you for the shout out on my involvement at the very beginning. This type of grant program is definitely needed in our day. I wish I could say that we don't need it. Senator Pappas, you're correct. There's different houses of worship that go to extraordinary lengths to keep their parishioners safe. My particular church that has a collective opinion of supporting Israel, anytime that message is exhibited, we have a police car in front of the door. Our pastors have received numerous threats over the years, and we, from a religious perspective, we recognize that it is a responsibility for our faith to speak in favor of Israel and the Jewish people. I wish and I hope that every member of the legislature will support this provision because it shows unity that we as a society take a responsibility for keeping all people of all faith safe as they practice that faith. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Westlin.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Senator Westlin.
Just this isn't for only houses of worship, but those seem to be the institutions that are often targeted. But there are other nonprofit institutions that may find themselves the subject of repeated threats over and over again. And so I would want to be clear that houses of worship may frequently be those who are seeking additional funding for their security. It certainly is not limited to that. And I think the other thing that I would mention, the way the process works is the nonprofits, this is in the bill itself, nonprofit organizations whose applications for funding through FEMA, FEMA's Nonprofit Security Grant Program, have been approved by the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management are eligible for grants under this section. And FEMA's future is somewhat uncertain. Mind you, we get 2% back from the federal government for these types of grants, but 2% can make a big difference in budgets. And so with the federal funding stream being somewhat uncertain, I think it is all the more important, Mr. Chair, that we fund this program here in Minnesota to ensure that we are providing resources for organizations in Minnesota for their safety and their security.
Any further questions? Senator Oumou Verbeten.
Thank you, Senator Westlin, for the bill. I just wanted to add that I've heard about this from places of worship in my district as well, St. Paul, Hmong Alliance Church, certainly other churches, mosques, synagogues. It's a growing issue, so thank you for bringing the bill forward.
Senator Carlson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I want to add my anecdote to the others as well, that some of us have never experienced going into a religious building or being part of a religious ceremony where you actually get an introduction to the security that is ongoing while you're there, telling you what the exits are, what doors are going to be locked, what doors are going to be locked so that you can't get back into them, and how you do get back in if you actually have to leave for a short time. It makes you really, it gives you a real uncomfortable feeling when you know that there's some people out there that are so dedicated to hate that you have to consider, just like a fire, just like any kind of other emergency drill, that you have to figure out where the exits are and how to get out of the building if there's something that happens. So it was a very, let's say, a extreme experience for me and my wife when I had to do, or I did do, a presentation in a synagogue and had to have the instructions on what the security was like for us to be comfortable there while it was going on. So thank you very much, Senator Westlin, for bringing this together.
Seeing no further discussion, Senate File 734 is laid over for possible inclusion. Members, we're going to take up Senator Westlin's Senate File 543. Main testifier is ill today and not available to join us, so we're going to have a brief summary of the bill. We're going to lay it over, and then we will take it up some other date to receive testimony. Senator Westlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. This bill is a bill to provide funding for the Minnesota Family Resiliency Partnership. We had a brief discussion about this earlier with relation to Senator Oumou Verbeten's crime victims support bill. For 45-plus years, the Minnesota Family Resiliency Partnership has been a trusted pre-employment and family stabilization program provided by a network of 6 regional partners across the state of Minnesota. The partnership is the only program in the state that is designed to help displaced homemakers. This program helps address the unique issues and barriers that displaced homemakers face when they try to enter or re-enter the workforce after losing a partner due to death, disability, or divorce. Participants in the program participate in a variety of activities such as one-on-one self-sufficiency counseling, weekly life skills workshop series, needs assessments, and creation of individualized action plans. The program also assists participants in identifying and accessing resources key to their self-sufficiency journey. You should know that 73% of displaced homemakers served by this program were victims of domestic violence. Of the participants with a child support order, 75% were not receiving the court-ordered support. So this bill, in essence, provides some additional funding through 2 sources. Section 1 raises the amount designated to the partnership from $30 to $60 from dissolution of marriage court fees. And Section 2 raises the amount designated for the partnership by $30 from the marriage license fees. And as we discussed, there are a couple of different bills circulating, and we are going to do our best to try to coordinate and see how we can get the 3 bills that are touching upon this particular program to sort of work together. Minnesota Family Resiliency Partnership is more than workforce development program. It is a holistic, client-driven program with a 97% success rate. Successful completion of the program is determined by the attaining of one's goals listed at intake, typically entrance into a degree or certificate program or becoming employed. The partnership is a life-changing program that helps our unseen, unemployed, or underemployed populations who would otherwise not receive such services. This program is paramount to the success and stability of families after a divorce or the death or disability of a partner. I would also say, Mr. Chair, that this program has not received any increase in their funding, I believe, for 22 years. It is a modest request, and we look forward to hearing our testifiers at a later date when they take this bill up, but I did want to have the opportunity to present the bill today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Westlin. Any members of the committee have any questions or comments at this time? I am not seeing any. So Senate File 543 will be laid on the table for possible inclusion, and we will take it back up when the testifiers are available. Members, our next committee hearing is Monday, March 10th at 12:30 back here at this room, we expect. But keep an eye out. I think we're still going to be here, but there may be some adjustments to location. So just watch for that because there are some competing space needs at the Capitol complex at the same time. With that said, we are adjourned.